G'day, it's November 2019. It's about 4 degrees, probably Celsius here at the moment, and we're on the banks of the Gibbo River in northeastern Victoria, in the foothills or mid-range into the Victorian Alps. The reason we're here is because in this bush, about 150 years ago, this quiet, secluded area of Victoria, which is now all you hear is the bush birds and that sort of thing, and you know, the wind and the trees and the running of the river over there to my left. But what 150 years ago there were men in here, hard, tough men, working hard and mining for gold. So when we look at this country around here, there's all these piles of boulders, and to the untrained or the unknown, it would look like something Mother Nature's done, but that's not true. No, that's not. This was put here by men who worked these banks behind me here to my right. They took these banks and pulled all these boulders out to get to the quartz-bearing gold, and that's how they made their grub stake and made a living and survived. Now, the interesting thing when we apply the theatre of the mind is to think who these people were. They came from all over the world. There were Europeans, there were Chinese, there were English, they came from everywhere. But there was a number of them that came from the United States of America, and a small number of them came from various parts of the eastern states and the western states. One particular fellow we're very interested in, and part of it is to do with our interest in relation to missing persons and to understand their life stories and where they came from and what their families may have thought about where they ended up. But not too far from here, about 30 or 40 kilometres north, there's another mining area which we hope to visit in the next day or two, and we know that there's reportedly a fellow there who's buried there, who died on the fields, and his name was Charlie Blevin. Now, Charlie is an interesting character because he was reportedly an American Indian, a Native American. And when we think about that in the context of the 1800s, it's quite amazing to think of an indigenous person from North America being over here mining gold in the Victorian mountains. But when we look into that too, we also start to imagine who was Charlie. And it may be that Charlie was from perhaps the eastern tribes of America, and we know amongst some of those tribes, especially the Cherokee and the Creek, that there were a number of people who had the surname Blevins, and there was a small number that had the surname Blevin. Now, we also know that in the 1830s, when the whites pushed the Cherokee, forced them off their land in Georgia and the other parts of those states and areas around there, ironically for gold. So they pushed them off that land for gold, and some of the best miners in the California gold rush were Cherokee Indians. And we reckon, maybe, just maybe, that Charlie Blevin, old Charlie Blevin, who's buried in these hills, may have been a Cherokee. Isn't that's just amazing when you think about that. And when we look at the work that went into pushing these boulders up, these were hard, tough times. All these trees are all regrowth from after the gold rush. There wouldn't have been any trees here along the riverbanks they would have all been cleared away. And they built their houses out of the trees, the roofs out of bark. They probably existed on a diet of flour, a bit of meat, bit of rough meat, and probably a billy of tea now and then, and that was it. And yet they had the energy and the tenacity and the strength to continue to mine these hills from about the 1850s right up until the last, I think, miners came out of here in about the 1930s. But at the time, this area here probably had 20 or 30 men and women and some children working here, and sadly, many of them are still here buried in the bush.
Local historian Brett Lee and his relatives, the Bramall family, have lived in these hills for decades. Brett lives in his cabin on King's Flat, not far from Charlie's final resting ground.
We come along 30 odd years later, and I don't know why, I was just interested to put something on it, and I probably want to get interned there myself. So, we went back to Max Dyer, and he related what Dave King had told him, and I think I might have scorched the bush up there a bit to try and find the signs of where the pack track went round the corner of the cemetery, and it was supposedly about this deep where it had washed out. And I went up there and I scoured it, and that was the best we could come up with. I don't think the original site was right, but I don't know as ours is right either, because I could not find that washaway, which you should have been able to find even 90 or 100 years later. Yeah.
Now, there's a number of names on the cairn.
Yeah.
How did those names come to be collected, to be associated with
Max
that?
Dyer would be instrumental in most of that, and a chap by the name of John Murphy helped put that plaque together to give memorial, basically. And we had a church service for those, because they probably didn't get one, and it was just recognition of those that are interred there.
Some of the names there, Brett, can you tell us about the names that you know on there and what you think about them, or what you surmise? A bit of reconology, you know.
Yeah. Well, the main one that I got given as a kid is the one of Mrs. Lawrence and baby, and it always sort of stuck in my head. And in the last 20 years, we know that Joseph Lawrence was one of the mine managers at the Lady Lock mine. Saltpeter United at one stage it was called, but we don't even know when she lost the baby and died. The other thing we do know that's a bit confusing is a Scottish couple by the name of Lawrence ran an accommodation site just below the cemetery. So did old Mrs. Lawrence get pregnant and die there? We don't know, and there's nothing documented to tell us that. Charlie Blevin was another one from Max Dyer, and that came down from Dave King, and that was old Mr. Blevin. We didn't even have a first name initially, as far as I recollect. It was just old Mr. Blevin. And as we know, we found out that he was an American Indian. So, yeah. John Smith Miller, I think, is the one that's got the fall of Earth. That was a John Murphy, and the others I couldn't actually tell you. But John Murphy, one of our local researchers, historians, was in Melbourne with the access to the archives and time to do it at the time. So,
and old Mr. Blevin, can you do you get an impression as to what era that was, or what?
Yeah, well, I'm only guesstimation on that one, but we do know from what I shared with you, what John said here a few weeks ago, that he worked with a Mr. Brown on a reef. Now, reef mining started on the Dart in 1881. So he's in that era at that time. The last of the reef mining was found in Saltpeter Creek about 1888. So you're looking at the 1880s. I would think that he probably passed on and was interred there.
Kevin Bramall, Brett's cousin, took the crew and I into the secluded location where Charlie and other miners were laid to rest.
Well, who was this guy? Charlie Blevin, Blevin. Now we know the Cherokees mined gold back in Georgia, and they took those skills over to California, and they were an instrumental part of the Californian gold rush. Very clever people. especially on reef mining. Was there reef mining up through here?
Yeah. Just up the creek over here, there was probably 4 or 5 tunnels. Sort of alluvial down here.
Okay.
And so that would have fitted into his the reef mining fitted into his what's the word?
His skills.
Skills. Yeah.
See, we're also told that Charlie, all these things they're all maybes, you know, but Charlie had a mate called Brown. Well, he used to mine with. There's a fellow here called John Brown. So whether they're the same two fellas, and the other thing he was referred to as Old Indian Charlie.
Okay.
Now whether that's post his death or
Just looked old.
or he just looked old, or whether he was a pretty old man working these hills. We'd love to find out who he was and tell his full story. It'd be fantastic. We know a little bit here, but we'd love to find out about his background in the States. Wouldn't that be amazing? Now on this particular can, there is a name here that we are really interested in. It's Charlie Blevin, B-L-E-V-I-N, and it says here an American Red Indian, a Native American. Now, what we want to know is who Charlie was, where he came from, the backstory. We can talk about life in the goldfields and what would have probably been happening when he was here, but what we want to put together is the full story. Where are his descendants? Where did he come from? What sort of Native American was he? Was he Cherokee, who we know are very good gold miners? If you can tell us anything about the Blevins or Charlie Blevin, contact us at our email address, and we'd really appreciate it and love to do the connection and tell Charlie's story.